Hello everyone and welcome to this second video on Toon Boom Harmony. My name's Adam Oliver. I run Adam's Animation Academy and I'm going to be going through some of my favorite useful functions and features of the software. And now I'm moving on to the subject around posing. So it's more how to work with a rigged character, moving on to the kind of the system and the setup that Toon Boom is famous for. So what we're looking at here is a character that is drawn into the software, but on the right hand side in this no view, you can see there's a group. And if we zoom out in this group, we can see there's a structure, a hierarchy. Okay, so this is like the skeletal structure of the character. And this is the thing that makes the software very powerful. It means that you can drag and drop animation and poses and reuse from one scene to another. So it can go across whole series and build up and speed up the production, which is why it's now used so much in animated TV series and film and everything else. Before I go any further, I just need to explain a little bit for people who are new to the software about this structure and how it works and maybe how it differs from other software. So when we are selecting things in Toon Boom, one of the important things to do is to make sure we're using in the rigged setup, so this is cutter animation, we need to use this tool. It's the transform tool. It's Shift and T is the shortcut. And we click on elements and objects, and then we press B to move up the hierarchy and Shift B to go down it. Okay, so if I selected this hand here on this character and pressed B, it's going to go up to the lower arm, or the forearm and the hand, then the upper arm, and then up to the body, and then the whole character. And then you can go back down it. And that allows you to select and also have the pivot point as the rotation point, which is set when you build the character. So it allows you to keep within that structure, that skeletal structure. If you think about it in terms of a human skeleton, it's like bending your arm the way it bends. Whereas if you were to just move the thing, obviously you still have the option here in animation to do that, but that's going to make it much harder to track your arcs and make the animation more appealing and the character more believable. So this structure actually aids your animation. It's kind of like working with an actual puppet on a stop motion project and it having an armature underneath it. It's harder to break that armature, and the way to use Toon Boom is to make sure you keep to that armature or that skeletal structure by using the hierarchy. So once a rig is built, try to stay within the confines of it, and it's going to make your life much easier. And we have to use this transform tool to select objects, not the selection button up here, the black selection arrow. These are generally what I call drawing tools. These are for kind of moving and selecting and editing the drawings on the paper or the cell, whereas the transform tool is actually to move the object around. So in Toon Boom, you have drawings and you have pegs. And the drawings are static unless you actually edit the drawing. And the peg itself is kind of the container. So I'll give you a quick example. If I click on this hand here and press O, that jumps to it inside the node view. This light blue rectangle is a drawing. Well, it's an element node, but that's a drawing. And then there's its peg. So anything we do on this peg, if we stretch this hand around, if we were to rotate it, if it's got a deformer on it, which we'll talk about later. But let me just give you a quick example. If I skew that, if I go to the drawing view, which is this tab here, if you watch the first video, you will have seen I talk about how the drawing tab basically just looks at the drawing. So it's going to eradicate this peg for a second. You can see how that hand is still in its reset mode. Okay, so no matter what I do to the peg above it, I'm always going to be able to go back to that default drawing. And that's why Toon Boom is so powerful, because it allows you to get more mileage, so to speak, out of your drawings by, using the pegs and things like deformers to kind of pose the thing out, and then obviously save and reuse when you need to. A little bit about posing a character like this then, so you can understand one of the strengths of the software and the power of how it works. It's got a hybrid feel to it. It feels sometimes a little bit like 3D, sometimes a little bit like other 2D software, but remembering this hierarchy, and obviously every character is going to be different. You've got things like deformers, which are these little kind of like green lines that are appearing. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And this is going to allow me to within the confines of the rig, it's going to allow me to pose the character out. So you see how I'm using this transform tool. I'm clicking, rotating, and so on. And I can change the hand shapes by using just the shortcut. And this will allow me to switch them back and forward. And it's the same for drawings like the arms and the legs. You can change these out. There are deformers, like I said. These little lines are giving me, I'm basically editing the drawing itself without actually having to draw it again. So it's saving me time. And I can just add a little bit of a curve there. And let's just switch this hand out as well. So it's very easy to pose out. And you just basically, it is very much like a pure cutout system. You are posing the pieces and allowing yourself to kind of just gradually edit the character. Now, there's lots of complicated things that we can do here to make, so we can get kind of like an IK feel for the legs and so on. I'm not going to go into that now because it's a bit more than is needed, but you do need to know that there's lots and lots of options available to you in Toon Boom to kind of create these very advanced characters that can be posed and set, and again, a lot like 3D rigs and 3D animation. So that's just a simple overview about how you would pose, but it is a 2D animation package with the ability to get a lot of reuse out of the drawings by using the pegs, the containers above them, and you can just simply move the things around. You don't have to be drawing every frame. You don't have to be fantastic at drawing. I've seen people work on animation productions in Toon Boom and they don't draw at all. Not because they don't want to sometimes, just because the production allows you to use all the cutout reuse that already exists. So therefore, it speeds up production and it makes it animation more accessible to more people. Now, let's talk about deformers. These are those things I was telling you about which extend a drawing's usability, shall we say. So if I look at this arm here, I'm going to press the letter O to jump to, this is inside the node view. Remember, this is the timeline without time. So it's all the elements in the scene, but not on a time-based level. So we have a container here. This is for our drawing element. Then we have the deformer that applies. It's always top down. So think like a waterfall, it goes down. And then we've got the peg for the arm. So this thing moves everything around. And the hand is a child. You can see how it flows down. So the parent and child terminology is very similar to 3D. And this deformer here, basically what it does is you can choose to make these kind of like, I guess they're kind of very similar to when you are using vector illustrations themselves, and you can edit the vectors and the curves and the handles. But this instead is actually an animation tool or a posing tool. And I can pose out here and just, adjust this drawing. So this is a straight kind of tubular arm. And if I click on that arm again, go to the drawing, you can see this hasn't affected the drawing itself. It's just posing. It's kind of like the peg. It's just affecting the thing on top of the drawing. And this is now saved into the timeline. So if I was to copy this, and I'm going to go over the use of the library and reuse shortly, but if I was to copy this, I would be able to then save this pose and put it into another scene. Now, on just an arm itself, that might not seem like a big deal, but if you are thinking about a character with maybe a couple of hundred layers in there and you're able to copy and paste, that's going to save you maybe 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden you do that on several poses and you're looking at saving a couple of hours, and that's on one scene. And you multiply that by how many people are in your animation team or on your short film or whatever else the project you're on, it's starting to save you days and it starts to become a really useful, massive time saver. And that's why this Harmony library, which we're going to talk about, is going to become your best friend, basically, because it's going to allow you to save the things that are important to you and also reuse your animation throughout your project. Just before we talk about the library, though, I just want to cover Z-depth. So in a normal graph, if you think about Y being up the vertical and X along the bottom, we've also got backwards and forwards, or closer to the viewer and further away is on the Z axis. So we can move things backwards and forwards. Now, Toon Boom works with this what I would call kind of like a deep sort of timeline where every layer is accessible all at once. It's just all nested on one layer and another with parents and children and so on. That can be difficult to navigate if you just jump through the timeline, if you're trying to scroll to look for things. But one of Toon Boom's great features is that you can find things very easily by clicking on something and just pressing the letter O, and it will jump to that exact layer in the timeline. So you never really have to scroll through it. You can use the visuals up here. You can also click on the item in the node view and press O, and it will jump to it there. So you can find the exact keyframe that you are working on. Now, just for clarity point, here I've got yellow keyframes on my timeline. Yours will be maroon red by default. I just changed mine. You can customize any color in Toon Boom. It's really good. If you've got eyesight that's like mine and I have to wear glasses, I choose to have a higher contrast keyframe, so it's easier to see on the dark style sheet. So you can customize those things, but in case you're wondering, that's why my keys are yellow. Now back to the Z depth. If, for example, I want to move this arm and hand, this lower arm or forearm and hand behind the body, I have a couple of options available to me. And obviously you could create a new layer and create this drawing and copy it and paste it on there behind, but there's no need to do that in Toon Boom because of the Z depth keying. So I can just use the shortcut Alt or Option with my mouse still over the camera view, and then press the up arrow, and it will just nudge it backwards. So it's just keyed it into position now so that I can push it behind, and that keyframe information is just going to be in there contained in that one single key. There's nothing else to do. It's very simple to use, and it makes it much easier than having to create whole new layers. I'm aware, and I've worked myself in other software where you don't have this simplicity when you approach Z depth and moving orders around. So for me, this is one of the power features of Toon Boom, the simplicity of using the depth and rearranging the pieces in terms of how close they are to the camera. So finally for this video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the library and exporting and importing and reusing poses and animation before we get onto the third video where I actually talk about animating in the software. So when we have something like this, say you want to take this pose and you want to reuse it on a different version of this scene where the character has no poses in it, and you don't want to copy from one to another, you just want to pop it in somewhere where you can easily reference it. Well, that's what the library exists for. So the library tab in Toon Boom allows you to reference a folder on your computer where the software recognizes these TPL or template files, and it can import them into the same structure. So that's what this hierarchy is we're looking at. So this structure, as long as it doesn't change, we can copy and paste between the different scenes. So it's a really fast way of reusing your animation and poses. So let's do a little example here. I've got my reset basic pose, and let's just say I want to copy this. So I'm going to press F6 on this to set a keyframe on every frame, so it's nicely ready to go. I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to paste. And I'm just going to call it Diver Pose Demo. And then it will add this here. If I want to see a preview, I can right-click and generate a thumbnail. It'll take a second, and then you'll see a preview of what it is in there. Now, if I was to remove this to replicate me having a blank scene, say I want to put that pose back in on the timeline, as I open a new file, I'll still have this Harmony Premium library available to me with everything in it. I just, it depends what's in the camera view, it might be different. So this, remember, is a referenced folder on your computer, whereas the timeline is something that's specific to this scene. So these two things are not the same thing. They're different parts of your computer. So I can bring this in, just drag it onto the timeline, and it will pop that pose straight back in very quickly. You can also reuse animation. So I've got a run cycle here. You can preview it if you want, and I can just drag this in, and I know that the sequence is going to fit because the structure is the same. Now you can see on this version, I actually hid the armbands, and it will remember that. So if you've told the animation to be there, but without the armbands on, I've just turned them off to make them a blank drawing. It will remember this. It remembers all drawing exposures. It remembers all peg positions, any deformers that you've changed. can be hundreds and hundreds of layers, and it will just quickly paste it into the timeline. And there you've got your reuse animation. And from there, you can customize it for that scene. So if this character was running, trying to hold a giant tray of cake or something like that, you could just go in and remove the animation from the arms. So I just pressed B there to select all that arm. I've pressed O to jump to that layer. Can remove these keyframes. And this arm is now going to be static. Okay, it's moving with the body, but it's static. So I could then start to pose this arm out into this position where I'm going to bring it forward in Z depth to get it in front of the head there. And you can change these positions of these hands, and we can start going through frame by frame and positioning this and adjusting it for the new animation. I'd have to add my prop in, obviously, to hold my tray of cake, but this would allow me to very quickly use that basic run cycle and then customize it for the scene and therefore speed up the animation process. Oh, and one last thing before I go. Let's talk briefly about adding a prop. Now, say for example, I wanted to add a little top hat for whatever reason to this character here and attach it so that it follows the head. So as the head moves around or rotates, so does the hat. Now, this could be a prop that the character is holding in the hand. It could be attached anywhere to the body, anywhere where there's a peg, one of those green rectangles like we have here. So this example is going to be just attached to the head peg. Now, you could obviously add it to the drawing of the head itself, but that becomes more problematic because it tends to be in complicated rigs, harder to find out, where that prop is and to remove it. So what tends to happen with animation production is this prop will be something that's on the external of this rig group. It makes it much easier to get rid of it if you don't want it, and also to see where it is. Now I'm just going to quickly show how this thing would be attached. So I'm jumping to the head. I'm just going to connect this up outside. This is called the multi-port out. And I've just connected it up. So now instead of it being attached here, it's attached here. Now that might seem a little bit complicated. It probably is going to be if you're new to the software, but that's the kind of the slightly more complicated but better way to do it. You'll see this in production-based rigs. And there's nothing wrong with adding the prop to the drawing itself, but this is another powerful feature of Toon Boom that I think is very unique. And it allows us to have this hat attached to here. But now this is pre-existing animation of the character running, but I need to extend the drawing itself. So I'm just going to press F5 for the exposure. And now this hat is going to follow the animation that already exists. And if I wanted to delete that hat at any time, I could just deactivate it by pressing D and reactivate if I need it on. That will render like that as well. It doesn't need any other setting applying to it to tell it not to render. Or you can delete the whole thing altogether, and it will still leave this port to allow you to attach other things to the head if you want to. So it's a very handy way of quickly attaching props. You can set up a rig with these ports to attach props as you need them, because they tend to always attach to hands or the head itself. And your animators can work, or you as an animator can work with a rig without having to go inside and find specific things in here, which is a lot more complicated way of doing things. So that's how you would quickly attach props, and also the professional approach to doing so. Okay, so I hope that little introduction to posing in Toon Boom and using rigs has been helpful and maybe given you a good idea of the sort of tools that are available to you in Toon Boom Harmony Premium. In the next video, I'm going to talk about animating in the software.